All right, let's go on to our speaker, Tommy Lewis, United States Navy. Tommy and I, we've known each other now for a couple of years. I think it was pre-COVID we got connected.
We did.
And then during COVID, his company made up these really cool Metroport Veteran Association masks that, interestingly enough, look like neoprene bra tabs. But I don't know if you guys just had extra ones and you cut them all in half, or how that worked.
You do what you can.
But yeah, so they were attention getting when you wore them out in public. But Tommy, interested in hearing your story, and I'm glad that you're here to tell it.
You bet. Thanks, sir.
Thank you. The floor is yours.
All right. So it's a pleasure to be up here today. Grace to have my wife join today as well. And I've gotten to know most of you over the last couple of years. I present for a living. I present probably 5 to 7 times a week. And this is more challenging than what I do for a living. Because I've heard a lot of y'all's stories, the time you spent on the ground. Everybody made it back in some way that's in this room. Not everybody made it back the same way they went in. And my military career was so much different than everybody that I heard that I've ever heard speak in here. So as we go through this, it's a little unique, and hopefully it's not too boring for you guys. So thought it was important to call the legacy out. On the board up there, my family has been in the military on both sides, documented back to the Civil War. My mom's side all the way back to the Revolutionary War here in the U.S. and got all that information here just a few years ago. Top right photo, or the right photo, is my maternal grandfather. The center is I gotta say this right. It's my mother's grandfather. The center is my grandfather. The gentleman in uniform on the far left is my great-grandfather. And the gentleman to his right, to his left, is my great-great-grandfather. And he was spent the war 1900, and I mean, it's all the way back. It's kind of crazy, and I've just now been getting this information, so it's pretty cool to see it. I went in as a geek, I guess is the best way to say it. The nuclear Navy is a rare breed of strange people. If you've watched anything like The Big Bang Theory, those were my classmates. Dungeons and Dragons, Jolt Soda, just the strangest, palest group of people you'll probably ever meet. And I hope not too much like that, but a little bit, I guess. Anyway, it was a crazy little world that I signed up into. I knew I was going into the military forever. Went in, the recruiter, of course, sold me on this nuclear Navy thing pretty well. Got recruited by a gentleman who was former Navy nuke as well, he was a recruiter, but he was a Navy nuke as well. And so the world shaped up nicely for me. The washout rate is what made it interesting to me. So the washout rate for Navy nukes when I was in the neighborhood of 50 to 80% annually. So if you classed up 100 people, you were looking at somewhere in the neighborhood of 20 to 50 people that would make it all the way through the session. I like that. I wanted something that was going to press and challenge. I didn't know till I went to boot camp that I could run. And went into boot camp and they said do push-ups. I could do push-ups all day long. Didn't bother me. Then they said we're going to run 10 miles. Didn't bat an eye at it. Had no idea, because all of that activity was torture while you were in high school, right? You didn't run because you did well. You run because you missed a tackle. You run because you played a ball off your hip. So I went in and I learned so much about myself in the first 12 weeks of being in the military. Ended up getting a little recognition, mentoring the kids who were struggling with the academics that were in boot camp, which a lot of people forget that there was a little bit of that. Went into A school, got to the top of the class very quickly, ended up in a leadership role, and then it got interesting. The request was, by the instructors, was there are going to be kids who struggle. The ones who are struggling but have the will, we want to help them through. The ones who are struggling who don't have the will, we want them out. And so starting in my first year and all the way through my second year, as I was tutoring kids and helping them get through, I was their classmates. The job was to push them, and I ended up with a couple of kids that were under my, there's not a formal name in the military, but under my tutoring responsibility, that ended up trying to kill themselves. Suicide rate in nuke school was pretty intense. There was usually anywhere from 5 to 20 a year in a class up of 2,500 students. So if you think of Duke University's got annual enrollments, 4,000 undergrads. Navy nukes is 2,500 students at class up every year, with a graduation somewhere in the neighborhood of about 1,250 or less. The suicide group rates in that were kind of crazy, and I don't know about y'all's career, but we weren't supposed to really acknowledge weakness or death. And so you start just shutting down and not paying attention to it at all. And I joked for years that I was an unfeeling bastard, and turned out I was pretty right. I didn't really notice any of it. Got to nuke school, or prototype up in Connecticut, which was a really cool place. And the reason you see all these stock images from the web, every base I was on while I was in school, you couldn't take a camera. So I have no documented evidence of any photos that I took on any post I was on, because we weren't allowed. But this was an actual nuclear power plant. It was basically, if you think of a submarine, it was the reactor room backwards, and you'll see a photo in a second. And you had an active nuclear power plant on it. It's called S1C. Moved about 400 students a year through there. I stayed as an instructor for 3 years, finished first in my class, had a ball. I loved military school. I had no idea how much a self-paced school was better than an organized classroom. They gave you the books, they taught you how to learn, they taught you how to go, and I just loved it. So I stayed there for a number of years. Had some kids that we really did some amazing work with, and when I say kids, I was a E5, but half my students were officers. So your ability to distinguish rank in that part of the world, and yes, we all have our formalities and everything, it just went away. And then we had about 20% of the group was civilian, and then you're at the bar with the officers and the civilians telling you that they're making 4 times what you're making, and then you get like, okay, maybe there's something more to life than what we're doing. But I did that for a number of years, had a great time, really enjoyed what I was doing, and it was probably the best duty that I could have ever had. It really matched my personality. And got to throw you a little imagery up here on Submarine, but the real power is in the center right here, just behind the sail. It's where the reactor room is. All submarines in the water today, there's 71 active, they're all nuclear powered. The only other nuclear powered vessels in the water today are the aircraft carriers. And so there are active right now 98 Navy managed nuclear plants in the U.S. Admiral Wickover started this program back in the 50s. Very intense around what the goals were in the program. Safety was number one, of course. To date, there are no documented Navy nuclear incidents in the history of the Navy nuclear program. And our world, the engineering world, were referenced as snipes. Civilian time when you're on land, and I call it civilian time because it has nothing to do with being in the military other than, I mean, you're not even wearing a uniform, you're wearing a jumpsuit every day. And so you're doing your thing, you're on land, you're doing a time, you go to the submarine, you're on 12-hour shifts while everybody else is off on liberty. And so it's just a very unique little space. The people who were in the nuclear Navy, the retention bonuses were very high because you were worth so much more on the civilian side of the world. And so my reenlistment bonus in 1991, they allowed you to reenlist after you certified as a nuclear operator, was $30,000. And for the people who were in the Navy who were not nukes, they hated us. We got promoted really fast. We got promoted just about as fast as you could. We got paid more than everybody else for the most part. And it was a really small little group. So if you think of it, year in, year out, there are 250 SEALs that graduate. Year in, year out, there are 1,000 pilots that commission into Navy aviation. And year in, year out, there are only 2,000 Navy nukes that come out. So it's a small little club. And this part of the world here, the submarine that I got assigned to, I thought I was finally going to sea. When I transitioned out as first in my class, I'm supposed to get choice of duty. And I got sent to the USS Kamehameha in port. It was, when I arrived, there was a hole in it the size of a Volkswagen. They were converting it from the the SSBN, Ballistic Missile Submarine Kamehameha, to the SSN, Fast Attack Kamehameha. And they took the nuclear missiles off of it, refitted it for SEAL delivery, and these pods you see on the back of the submarine, which doesn't look like any other submarine you've probably ever seen a picture of, those are dry docks for SEALs to come in and out of for deployment underwater. And so you could go and drop a team off, nobody would ever know, and as quiet as a helicopter might be nowadays, it's not as quiet as a submarine at some particular depth. So this submarine had been refueled about a half a dozen times. When I was about 8 weeks into being on that submarine, I got clipped across the knees with a fire extinguisher during a drill and then an occurrence, and I spent a year in the Oakville Naval Hospital. 9 knee surgeries later, they said I was out. I was on path for officer candidate school. All the things were going exactly the way I wanted, and then it broke. My surgeon, her name was Commander DeMaio, walked into my room after my 9th surgery, put her hand on my head, first time she ever touched me anywhere than my knee, said, "You're out," and left me in a hospital room, seafoam green painted walls, no TV, no phone, for 3 days. And you're in there in your head, and I had no intention of getting out. And you're just trapped in your own thoughts, and you're like, what the hell am I going to do now? So, civilian life approached. I had a fantastic commanding officer on my submarine. Called him up, I said, they're booting me out. What should I do? And his response to me was, you should go into sales. Okay, walk me through that. And he said, well, and this was part of my responsibilities. When I signed my name to anything in the Navy, they had trained us that when you sign your name to any of the nuclear documents, any of the testing, any of the water chemistry, any of these things, when you sign that, you could go to Leavenworth if you lied or the document was falsified. And they beat this into us from the day we got to A school, and I probably heard it multiple times per day, every day while I was in and while I was around the nuclear life. So I asked, why do you go down this path of me being a salesperson? He said, well, if you can convince naval reactors to change a technical manual because the manual didn't match the machine and you wouldn't sign it till it matched, if you can convince them to change a 30-year-old tech manual, you can sell. Fair enough. So how do you do that? And he said, hire a resume writer. And if any of you guys do any coaching for anybody getting out of the military, there is no better money that you can spend than to hire an absolutely unfamiliar to the military resume writer. They will sit down. This lady interviewed me for 3 days. Cost a fortune, $1,600 in 1994. And I paid her, and she converted my military career to civilian life. Applied for 5 jobs, got 5 jobs. It was a brilliant process in the way to go through that. I ended up, took 6 months off to decompress. As my mother described it, I drank beer, played volleyball, and went fishing. That's it. And turns out I was really good at not doing shit. Like I crushed it. And she was a teacher. She called me, and one of the teacher's kids had gotten killed by a drunk driver on Thanksgiving Friday. Said, and it's on film, but here we go. She said, you're done fucking off. You're teaching school as of Monday. It was 5th and 6th grade science. You're in the game. And so I went out and started teaching public school. Loved the kids, hated the parents. Oh my God, the parents were just awful. But I did love teaching the kids. And my favorite part of teaching the kids were the testosterone learning young men. They were all idiots and they were horrible in the classroom. And so I just took military training and converted it to school training. So the superintendent comes in to audit my class and she says, Mr. Lewis, why are the children doing push-ups? And I said, it's their choice. So she rightly asked, well, what were your choices? Get arrested by the police or do push-ups till he says to stop. Reasonable choice. And so they did push-ups. We got to a point when they were really wound up where we would go run. And I was like, if you guys can outrun me, because I could still run, they put my legs back together well enough, I could run reasonably well. If you guys can outlast me on the track, then we won't have class anymore. There was one kid that had been held back twice, and this little turd could run. I mean, he could run all day long. And I outlasted him, but it was a lot. But I did that for a while, thought about it, but they wouldn't give me any credit for my military time, and they wanted to pay me like I was a right out of college teacher with no money. So I went into sales, and here's where we are now. So met my wife in 1995, went into sales in 1995, got married in 1998, went and found my niche career industry in 1998. And we all know this. Some of you have your spouses sitting here. She's brilliant. We were on our way to go meet our nephews in Florida, and she said, I was interviewing for jobs. I was getting ready to leave the company I was with, and one of the people called and said, hey, we want you to stay and do this branded merchandise promotional thing full time. Being the brilliant lady she is, take that one. Sure. Well, it turns out that I was really good at beer in the Navy. And I mean, really good. And when you got, in the military, they taught you, let me correct that, they taught me that every time you completed anything, you celebrated by going and getting hammered. Right? You didn't go have a beer, you had all the beers. And that worked really well when I started working with Corona and Shiner. They were my first real clients. When we started making money, the sales world satisfied the military thing of competing and really that individual effort, but in a team environment. So it worked for me. First clients were booze clients. That worked remarkably well. Ended up doing exceedingly well. My wife had an amazing job with AT&T. We didn't have kids. We started making money, and life really changed for us. And so here we are today. I have a remarkable wife of be 25 years in February. I have been in my industry now for approaching 25 years. I have responsibility of leading about 1,100 salespeople in business development on an annual basis. I get to do some volunteer time through the access that Carl has given me with some military support. I've got some work that I'm doing with clients in their ERGs in their own environments. I'm on a board for our industry, helping to expand the reach of our industry. And then I'm working on a task force to expand the audience that gets recruited into our space, because the industry I'm in, this branded merch world, is an afterthought. If you go get a marketing degree, it's 1 hour discussion at TCU in a 4-year marketing degree. So nobody knows about it. It's a $27 billion industry. And it's been very, very good to us. Really had a great time doing it. And I'm at another crossroads. My boss is asking me to take a promotion. And right now, I only have a few direct reports that I have to manage, be accountable to all of their individual behaviors. If I take this job, I get 600 direct reports. And go back to the unfeeling thing that the military taught me so very well. I don't have a lot of empathy naturally. Little Johnny's leg fell off. Can you get your job done? It's not going to be put back on by you. So and tongue-in-cheek a little bit, but the military really stripped me from being super attached to the challenges that people have from getting their work done. So it's a big part of what I have to focus on a daily basis, and she hears me on calls, and she knows that some of what I'm going through, it's the bench press part of the workout. It's leg day every day when you're sitting there trying to attach yourself to people, when the military spent 6 years, and according to what they told me, $2 million teaching me to feel nothing. And so I've had a great career. I have a remarkable life. I've heard a lot of folks come in and talk about the struggle of moving from civilian life to, or military life to civilian life. First few months I was out, the struggle wasn't, what do I do with myself, this, that, and the other thing. I had a plan. The struggle was, you go from this extremely structured world to this hippie, open-minded world where there's no plan. And I found out I was angry, didn't know I was angry, but I was pretty angry. And I mostly knew that because you would be in a bar, happened to, maybe y'all been to one, and I would get bumped into and it would just go straight to a fight. And that was about 6 months. And that waned pretty quickly after I started teaching school and I got back on task. But the drifting, volleyball, beer drinking, screwing off time my mother was not a fan of, we were living really well with that. We had a condo down on the water. Buddy and I, we grew up together. We were living a good lifestyle, but it really didn't match. And where I am today and the fun that we've had, we've traveled all over the world. We've seen a lot, we've done a lot, and now I get to give back a lot. The folks I coach, the folks that I work with on a daily basis, their kids move from not having college paid for to having college paid for. They move from not having a paid for home to a fully paid for home in just a couple of years. So all of that time I spent in the military, all the stuff that they did to my brain, the ability to move forward regardless of the obstacles, is probably the biggest win I got out of it. The fortitude you get from nuke school, the washout rates are pretty fun. I thought they were a lot of fun myself. The washout rates really started to teach you that stick to it no matter what thing. And so when I hear you guys talk about your career and the action and some of the stuff that you guys saw on the ground and the horrors that you saw while you were on the ground, I didn't get any of that. I didn't see any of that. Mine was very, very different. But I was graced to serve in the military, and I'm privileged to call you guys and gals brothers and sisters. So thank you.
Got a question for Tommy?
Yes, Emily.
Bad student.
That's all good, Emily.
Tommy.
Thank you.
Two things. How long was nuke school?
2 years.
Wow.
And specific class was 12 hours a day. And then there was 4 hours of study hall. And then if you weren't on your game plan, which about half the class wasn't on their game plan, then it was 8 hours of study hall on Saturday and Sunday as well.
And then you're talking about this job promotion. I don't know why you're thinking about that. You just need to ask your wife.
It's a good program. I get it. And that's it really, actually, she's an amazing sounding board. So, but yeah, it's a good call. And it's been a topic for about a month and a half now. So, but that's a very good point. So, anybody else? Yes, sir.
So I saw that you spent a lot of time ashore. Did you spend any time in a submarine under the water?
One day.
Okay.
I got to go out. When I got to my boat, it had a hole in it. And not a good idea to, right? So,
submarine in the street or
yeah, so, and then on submarine in my job, so I was actually the water chemist and radiologist for the submarine. On a submarine, there are only 3, at max 4 people that do that job, period. Mm-hmm. And so being away, if you think of, 8-hour shifts, which in port, they moved to 8 instead of 4 6-hour shifts. But when you're in port, there's nobody to do your job. So I was able to get a gentleman next door. Reactor was down and the responsibility was the same. He didn't have to be qualified for part of the job. We were able to swap for a day and I went out on his submarine. And every time you go out on a submarine, first thing they do is, when they know they've got a new person, is they run a string across the hull from one side to the other. And as the boat goes down, the string starts to sag until it's laying in a puddle on the floor. And the entire goal is to get you to understand that you are not where you once were. And when you qualify submarines, you have to be able to navigate all the systems in the boat, but you have to navigate the entire boat blindfolded. Because when it's on fire, the room goes black instantly. And it is super fast. So there's air stations all along the way. And so part of my gig was to go, I had studied their plan so that I could go and work on my qualifications for submarines. So it's a great question. And my request when I left was I wanted to go out on the USS Never See the Shore. I'd been on land for 5 years. I joined the Navy. If you're going to get promoted, you got to go. So when I arrived at my boat with a hole in it, that was probably the first real sign that I didn't love the Navy as much as I once did. So, yes, sir.
What company did you say you went to work for in sales?
The company I'm with now is a company called Halo Branded Solutions, based out of Sterling, Illinois.
Sterling, Oklahoma?
Sterling, Illinois. Yes, sir. It's the middle of nowhere, bunch of cornfields. Yes, sir.
Were you on the Saratoga since you were in the Navy?
I was not on the Saratoga, no, sir. But it's a great question.
He has gray hair, could have been the Constitution.
Could have been. Actually, I was on the Constitution. I did go over and tour that I went as a military and I went as a civilian. Military tour was a little more fun.
I bet it is.
Anybody else? Yes, sir.
You're an instructor, right?
Yes, sir.
How do you become an instructor? You said you did 6 years in total?
I did.
You got instructor ability at what point in your career?
As soon as I graduated and certified as a nuclear plant operator. So I finished first in my class all along the way. And they took what were called staff pickups for high performers. And so you go through a slightly different training for a little bit and move directly to instructor duty 2 years in. And we had a mix of what we called old salts. You guys probably had similar terms for the geezers in your group. And they were folks that had gone out, done sea duty, and came back. A lot of the folks that came back, they had the practical duty from the sea. The folks who were staff pickups were really strong on theory, really strong on the mechanics, really strong on drawings. And so they wanted you to have both the academic as well as the practical side of it. And so when you qualified at nuke school, you could actually draw every system on submarine in the engineering room. So you had to be great at it. You had to know where everything was. And then you had to understand what the impacts were as you made changes, and there were catastrophes, etc. So as you went through all of that, you go to sea, your experience changes, right? You move into a much more operational minded. So they needed the heavy theory as well as the practical to make sure everybody was ready when they went out, because you were one of about 25 people in the nuclear part, and you were probably one of maybe at most 8 people on a submarine that could do your job. So they really needed you nice and tight. It's a great question. Yeah. Anyone else? All right.
Tommy, I don't know if I've given you a coin yet.
Not the new ones, but
there
thank
you go. Yeah, thank you.
Pleasure.
Appreciate you being here.
Absolutely.
Well, I have a couple of quick questions for you. The first one was nuclear, like a nuclear scientist, right? I mean, not scientist, but yeah.
Yeah.
So current state of affairs in the world, could you be recalled if they needed nuclear expertise on a big scale?
Could I be? Possibly. If they went back into some areas, maybe I could be recalled into that. If you guys recall during the tidal wave that hit in Japan and broke the nuclear plant, so I just walked in the house, and it's a small group of people. You guys know your brothers really well, right? Brothers and sisters. And so I walked in the house, and the wave had hit the reactor, broke the reactor. And I'm standing there, I literally walked in, the TV is right behind me, and I hear this voice. And I know the voice. I turn around, it was one of my classmates was speaking on international interview about what had happened to the plant. So could I? Yes. Are there people probably closer to it now that are more qualified? Absolutely. So.
Nice, yeah. So second question, do you have a disability rating? You have to say what it is.
I do.
Do you?
I do. It's 40%.
Okay. Did they give it to you right away, or did you have to fight for it?
So because I got out under medical, they rated me at 0, which I thought was remarkable. You're saying I can't be in, but my rating is 0. We got rated then at 10, and I went back in a few years ago. It was after we moved here to Dallas, and I actually went in and I said, hey, can you guys tune up my knees? I want to get back to running because I lost my ability to run at 34. And I used to run 6 miles a day, every day, even after my surgeries. And the doctor said, you don't have 26 miles left in your knees, much less 26 at one time. And I said, okay, well, what does that mean? And so he turned in the paperwork and I got moved to 40%. But it should be higher at this point because the description they gave me with the way that my legs are working, it's basically just washing out all of my joints. They're all failing. Like my wrists are failing, my elbows are failing, and so I do need to go back and have it addressed.
We can help you with that. Yep.
And I would take that help. So.
Yep.
Sure.
The other thing that I was going to remark on is the commonality of your story, not in terms of the actual military experience, but in the departure.
Yep.
Because as I was finishing up my master's, I did a study, and for every 10 people that go in the military, only 1 retires. 6 of them do not reenlist. So 3 of them reenlist, and then don't retire. So for those 3, it could be a physical injury.
Yep.
It could be a toxic leader. It could be failure like getting a DUI. Could be having somebody that you know die or get maimed. But there's a thing that accompanies that when you leave that you kind of failed, right? So how did you feel about that? How did you, being walked in at that number of years that you put in the military to have your boss just say you're done and walk out and leave you there for 3 days? What did that do to your self-esteem?
It was so disturbing because I had no intention of getting out. I was a freak show. I saved money while I was in. I got my education while I was in. I didn't get married while I was in. I didn't have kids while I was in. I didn't have tattoos or piercings while I was in. I wanted to rule the world. I wanted to be commander of Submarine, and not that I had gone through this part of it, but I wanted to have charge of 14 nuclear weapons. I thought it was going to be awesome. And when they told me I was done, it was jarring. And because you don't think about it. You don't think about healthcare. You don't think about where you're going to live. You don't have any thoughts to share like that. And you start laying it out and you're like, well, what place do I want to be? And I actually interviewed a little bit in California. And then I realized that it was California. And then I realized the cost of living. And even with a good paying job, it was just insane. And to think about paying for a place to live was mind blowing. And so it was pretty rough. I took the first 8 weeks. I had a buddy of mine getting married in Massachusetts. And so I basically went on a mountain bike Jeep trip across the country and had a pocket full of money. And so I didn't have a bad time, because I didn't think about it. I just went biking every day. And to your point on the working out and keeping your brain in the game, that helped a lot. But it was, that 3 days in that room could not have sucked more. Hell, boot camp was a treat compared to those 3 days.
So it's important that veterans tell their stories, right? Because you think about the people here in this community, they see Tommy at the grocery store, the country club, or restaurant, know that there's this business guy that lives in the community, but don't know 1 iota about your military service. So I think it's super important to share that because people need to know.
Wow. So,
and I'd like to volunteer you to speak at the Veterans Day observance if you're going to be here on the 11th. So we can talk about that later. But
I remember voluntold. It just came right back.
Here's a refresh.
All right. My friend.
thank you. Nice job.